The water pipe in the basement has been dripping. Drip, drip. The drops hit the concrete floor, forming a dark gray puddle. I'm wearing a pair of old rubber boots, holding a rusty wrench in my hand. The drywall in the corner has long since softened. I press the edge of the wrench into the gap in the drywall and push down hard. The drywall lets out a dull cracking sound, and large chunks of white gypsum debris fall onto my shoe tops. Inside the wall is a square iron box. Black. It has a numeric keypad on it. I stare at the keypad for a moment. I reach out my right index finger and press the 4 digits of our wedding anniversary, 0-8-1-2. A beep sounds. The lock on the iron box pops open. I reach inside. It's empty, no cash at all. Only 2 yellow manila envelopes. I open the first envelope. Inside is a thick stack of documents. It's a life insurance policy. The insured column has my name written on it. The coverage amount column shows a long string of zeros, totaling $3 million. I scan down the form, and the beneficiary column lists a name I don't recognize, Sophia Vance. I open the second envelope. It's a draft of a bankruptcy application. In the applicant column, my husband David's name is signed. The wrench slips from my hand. It crashes loudly into the puddle, splashing muddy water everywhere. The pipe keeps dripping. Drip, drip. I crouch on the ground, clutching the 2 sheets of paper tightly in both hands. The edges of the paper dig into my palms, leaving red marks. Last night, David was sitting on the couch, showing me renovation plans for a vacation home in Hawaii on his tablet. He pointed at the large floor-to-ceiling windows on the blueprint and swore he'd install the most expensive soundproof glass for me. I stuffed the documents back into the manila envelopes. I put the envelopes back into the iron box. I close the iron box door, sweep the scattered gypsum debris aside, and cover the hole in the wall with a piece of old cardboard. I walk up the wooden stairs. The steps creak under my feet. I reach the first floor. From the kitchen, I hear David's voice. He's on the phone. Yeah, that shipment can go out next week. No problem. His tone is light with a laugh. I walk to the kitchen sink. I turn on the faucet. Cold water washes over my dust-covered fingers. I squeeze out a big glob of hand soap and scrub every crevice of my palms vigorously. The soap foam turns gray and flows down the drain. I tear off a sheet of kitchen paper towel and dry my hands. David hangs up the phone. He turns and looks at me. He walks over and places his hands on my shoulders. "Sweetheart, did you fix it?" he asks. I look into his eyes. His eyes are as bright as ever. "It's too hard to fix. I'll call a plumber to take a look tomorrow." I reply, "Good idea." He nods and turns to grab his coffee cup. I walk to the counter, pull out a bar stool, and sit down. I fold my hands on the marble countertop. "David, about that Hawaii vacation home plan you mentioned last night, I've thought it over," I say, staring at his back. He turns around, holding a cup of black coffee. "Really? You agree?" "Yes. I think you're absolutely right. We've worked hard for so many years. We deserve to enjoy ourselves." I stand up, walk over to him, and reach out to straighten his collar. "I also want to throw a party." David freezes for a moment. His hand, holding the coffee cup, stops midair. "A party?" "Yes, a grand dinner party. Right in our backyard." I point to the big lawn outside the window. "I want to invite your investors, your boss, and all those friends from your club. I want everyone to know how successful my husband is and how good he is to me. We'll announce the Hawaii vacation home renovation plan in front of them." The corner of David's eye twitches slightly. He sets down the coffee cup. "Honey, there's no need to be so flashy. It's just a regular renovation. It has to be done. I've already thought of the guest list for the invitations." I turn and walk to the sofa, picking up my phone. I'm calling the party planning company right now. I want the most expensive champagne tower and Boston lobster. David follows behind me. "Wait, planning companies are expensive. We could just do a simple barbecue ourselves." "David, you're about to spend hundreds of thousands on renovating a house for me, and you want to skimp on a party?" I turn my head and look straight into his eyes. David opens his mouth but can't get a word out for a long moment. He forces a smile. "Fine. Whatever you say.
He nods.
I dial the number of the top-tier party company in the neighborhood. I request 3 Michelin-starred chefs and order 500 white roses air-freighted from the Netherlands. I have the bills sent directly to David's usual email. That afternoon, David sat in the study in front of his computer. I walked in with a glass of water. The screen showed his bank account page. When he saw me come in, he immediately hit the keyboard and closed the page. Did you get the bill? I set the water glass on his desk.
Yes.
$25,000.
For party.
His voice was low, and his Adam's apple bobbed. What's wrong? Do you think it's too expensive? I pretended to reach for the glass. Maybe I should cancel it. I'll just tell everyone we're a bit tight on cash lately.
No.
David shot up and grabbed my wrist. Don't cancel. I've already paid. That's nothing. I looked at him holding my wrist. He was gripping it tightly. I could feel the cold sweat in his palm. Thanks, honey. I pulled my hand free and took the glass. Weekend evening. The yard was strung with warm yellow lights. The long dining table was covered in white silk tablecloth. Crystal glasses sparkled under the lights. 3 black cars pulled up on the driveway outside. Guests trickled into the yard. David's boss, wearing gold-rimmed glasses, held a glass of champagne. A few of David's investment partners gathered near the grill, chatting. I wore a brand-new red silk dress. I bought it yesterday afternoon at a luxury boutique downtown using David's supplementary card. $8,000. I walked into the crowd and gently tapped the edge of a wine glass with a fork.
Ding, ding, ding.
The yard fell silent. Everyone turned to look at me. David stood a few steps away, holding half a glass of red wine. He stared at me, his face frozen. Thank you all for coming today, I said, raising my voice and lifting my glass. I invited you all here to share some good news. I paused and walked over to David. I linked my arm through his. His arm muscles were tense, hard to the touch. My husband David has always been an amazing man. Over the past few years, his career has become more and more successful. I looked around at the guests. They were nodding and smiling. To reward me for taking care of our family all these years, David decided last night to put up $500,000 to fully renovate our vacation home in Hawaii. And he gave me full control over the design and purchasing. A burst of enthusiastic applause erupted from the crowd. Wow, David, you're really generous. David's boss raised his glass and called out loudly, "A model husband." A few partners chimed in. David had no choice but to raise his glass in response. The corners of his mouth pulled upward, forcing a stiff smile. Of course, she deserves the best. So, I contacted the Milan design team this morning. They'll fly in tomorrow to confirm the marble tile samples with me. I pressed close to David's arm and said loudly, "To thank David for his generosity, cheers." Cheers. Everyone raised their glasses. I downed the champagne in one gulp. I could feel David's body trembling slightly. 11 at night. The guests had all left. The yard was a mess. Workers were dismantling the tables and lights. David sat on the couch, in the living room. He loosened his tie and rubbed his temples with both hands. I walked over with a thick file folder. I tossed it onto the coffee table with a slap. David looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "What's this?" he asked, pointing at the folder. "The preliminary contract from the Milan design team." I sat down on the single sofa across from him and crossed my legs. "They'll be at the airport at 10 tomorrow morning. We need to pay $100,000 as startup funds. The money goes to their international account." David sat up straight. He stared at the file folder on the table. $100,000? Right now? Can't we wait a few weeks? He grabbed the folder, his fingers trembling slightly. "What's wrong? You said in front of everyone today that the $50,000 budget was mine to spend." I leaned forward, hands on my knees. "If you back out now, what am I supposed to tell the design team tomorrow? How do I explain it to the friends who came today?" David's breathing grew rapid. He clenched his jaw tightly. "Is something wrong with the company?" I widened my eyes, staring at his face. "If you're going bankrupt, you have to tell me. We can put this house on the market right away." At the word bankrupt, David flinched violently and shot up from the couch. "I don't have any problems. The company is doing great. he shouted. His face was bright red. He grabbed the file folder and strode into the study. He pulled open the drawer, took out the checkbook and pen, and quickly scribbled a string of numbers on the check. As he wrote, the pen tip tore straight through the paper of the check. He walked back to the living room holding that $100,000 check and slapped it down on the coffee table. "Take this to your designer," he said, breathing heavily. I picked up the check. I flicked the edge of it with my finger. Hubby is so good to me. I folded the check and put it in my pocket. "I'm going to check out a new car at the dealership tomorrow. That old Ford doesn't fit your successful businessman image anymore. I'm planning to buy a Porsche, using your name for the loan." David stood there. He stared straight at me, his eyes fixed. He opened his mouth, gasping for air. His fists were clenched tight, the veins on the back of his hands bulging one by one. He turned around and kicked the sofa. I sat on the single sofa, watching him walk into the bathroom, listening to the bathroom door slam shut. I touched the $100,000 check in my pocket. David left the house at 7 in the morning with his briefcase. Before he left, he stood in front of the fridge, tilted his head back, and took a big gulp of ice water. I could hear the loud sound of his Adam's apple moving. Then came the rumble of the garage door going down. I stood behind the curtains, watching his car pull out of the driveway. I folded that $100,000 check in half twice and stuffed it into the pocket of my jeans. I stepped into my old rubber boots, went down to the basement, moved aside the piece of cardboard, and took out the photocopy of the life insurance policy from the metal box. I started up the old Ford pickup. The radio was playing the morning traffic report. I stepped on the gas and drove onto the main road. After 40 minutes, the scenery changed from neatly trimmed lawns to dusty brick walls. I parked the car in front of a bungalow with a worn-out sign that read, "Vance's Vehicle Title Loans." A few motorcycles with chipped paint were parked in front of the bungalow. I pushed open the glass door. The brass bell on the doorframe jingled. The room had a sharp smell of motor oil mixed with cheap coffee. A woman sat behind a scratched wooden counter. She wore a black leather jacket and a pair of old steel-toed work boots. She was holding a pneumatic wrench, oiling a rusty car spark plug. She looked up. "For a loan, go grab a form by the wall," she said, nodding toward a plastic table nearby. I walked straight up to the wooden counter. I slapped the photocopy of the insurance policy hard onto the glass countertop. She set down the pneumatic wrench, picked up a rag from the table, and wiped her hands. She picked up the photocopy. Her eyes lingered on the $3 million number for a few seconds, then she lifted her gaze and stared at my face. "Did David send you?" She spit her chewing gum into the trash can by her feet. I tapped my finger on David's signature on the photocopy. "David owes you a lot of money. He plans to pay you back with a payout from this life," I said, looking into her eyes. The woman let out a cold laugh. She pulled open a drawer and took out a thick black ledger. She flipped to the middle page, turned it around, and pushed it toward me. It was filled with David's name, followed by a long list of red debt figures. In the corner of the page, there were a few photos stapled on, showing his signed IOUs from underground casinos. In the photos, David's eyes were bloodshot, and he was clutching a few chips tightly. I stared at those red numbers for a while. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the $100,000 check with the bank stamp. I laid the check flat on top of the ledger. The woman's eyes landed on the check. She recognized David's handwritten signature. "This $100,000, you can cash it directly at the bank on the corner," I said, leaning my hands on the counter edge. "Show up at my house at 4 this afternoon with your change of clothes. All the bad debts David owes you, I'll settle them for double." The woman raised one eyebrow. She picked up the check and rubbed the paper texture along the edge with her thumb. "Move into your house?"
Yeah.
"All you have to do is sit in front of him every day, watch him every second. Make sure he has no chance to stage an accident." I put the photocopy of the insurance policy back in my bag. "As long as you're there, he won't dare to make a move." The woman folded the check in half and tucked it into the inside pocket of her leather jacket. She picked up a knife from the table and started scraping the oil grime from under her fingernails. "See you at 4, she said, tossing the knife onto the table. Clatter. At 3:30 in the afternoon, I changed the sheets on the guest room bed on the first floor to brand new ones. At exactly 4, the doorbell rang. I opened the door. Sophia stood on the steps holding a huge black canvas bag with a baseball bat slung over her shoulder. At 6:30 in the evening, the garage door rumbled loudly. David pushed open the door to the living room. He set his briefcase on the shoe cabinet in the entryway, loosening his tie as he walked inside. Sophia was sitting on the mahogany sofa in the living room. She wore that leather jacket, her feet in work boots propped directly on the white coffee table. She held a can of cold beer, tilting her head back as she chugged it. David turned his head. He saw Sophia on the sofa. A sharp clatter. The car keys David had just pulled out dropped onto the hardwood floor. He stood completely frozen in place. His eyes were wide, his mouth half open, his chest heaving once violently. I walked out of the kitchen carrying a tray of freshly baked roast chicken. I set the chicken in the center of the dining table. David, you're back. I untied the apron from my waist and casually gestured towards Sophia on the sofa. Let me introduce you. This is Sophia. I just hired her in town today as the financial supervisor for our Hawaii vacation home. She's in charge of auditing every single material expense within our $50,000 budget. David's Adam's apple bobbed violently up and down. He stared intently at Sophia. His legs felt like they were filled with lead. He couldn't take a single step. Sophia stood up from the sofa. She crushed the aluminum beer can in her hand and tossed it into the nearby trash can. She walked over to David with heavy steps, extending her right hand. Hello, David. Sophia directly patted David on the shoulder. In the days to come, we'll be eating at the same table every day. David didn't extend his hand. Sweat dripped down his forehead, trickling along his cheek, and landed with a splat on the collar of his white shirt, leaving a ring of moisture.
Come eat.
I pulled out a dining chair and sat down. David walked to the table with stiff steps. He pulled out a chair and sat down extremely slowly. Sophia pulled out the chair directly across from him and sat down heavily. I picked up my knife and fork and cut into a piece of chicken breast. Sophia grabbed a dinner knife and stabbed it straight into a whole chicken leg. She tore off a large chunk of meat and chewed it loudly. The bones crunched between her teeth. David looked down at the empty plate in front of him. He reached for the water glass on the table. His fingers trembled violently, and the glass clinked against the tabletop, making a tinkling sound. Half the water spilled out, soaking the white tablecloth. David, you look very nervous. Sophia tapped the edge of her ceramic plate with her metal fork.
Ding, ding, ding.
I'm extremely strict with financial audits. Every single bad debt, I'll settle with you down to the last cent. I won't miss a single number. David jerked his head up. He looked at Sophia in terror, then turned to me in panic. I put a piece of carrot in my mouth and chewed slowly. I swallowed the carrot, picked up my napkin, and wiped the corner of my mouth. Sophia is very professional. I stared at David's sweat-covered face. She can even calculate all the hidden liabilities clearly. Honey, our finances are absolutely safe from now on. David grabbed the edge of the table with both hands. His knuckles turned white from the excessive force. He gasped heavily, shoved his chair back, and stood up. The chair scraped against the floor with a piercing screech. He turned and rushed to the bathroom on the first floor. The bathroom door slammed shut. Immediately, the sound of violent retching came from inside, followed by the sound of the faucet running at full blast. Sophia cut off another piece of chicken leg. She raised her water glass toward me. I raised mine too, and the two glasses clinked lightly in midair. The crisp sound completely drowned out the water noise from the bathroom. The next morning at 6:30, David had 2 large dark circles under his eyes. He walked into the kitchen in wrinkled pajamas, opened the refrigerator, and took out a carton of milk. Sophia sat at the counter. She wore the same black leather jacket from yesterday, holding a folding knife as she peeled a red apple. The apple peel fell onto the white marble countertop. David's hand trembled. The milk carton bumped against the refrigerator door. A soft thud. Morning, David. Sophia shoved a piece of apple into her mouth, crunching loudly. I'm bored staying alone in this big house. I'm going to your company with you today. David whipped his head around. Some milk spilled from his hand, dripping onto the wooden floor. "What are you going to my company for?" He growled in a low voice. Sophia reached into her leather jacket pocket and pulled out the crumpled original IOU. She slapped the paper on the counter. "To be your senior financial advisor. David, go get changed." Sophia pointed the tip of the knife toward the bedroom. David stared hard at the IOU on the counter. He clenched his teeth tightly, the veins on the left side of his neck bulging one by one. He turned and strode back to the bedroom, slamming the door shut. 8 o'clock sharp. David's car pulls out of the driveway. Sophia sits in the passenger seat, rolling down the window and resting one arm on the door frame. I sit on the fabric sofa in the living room, watching them leave. I pick up the tablet from the coffee table. David dropped it in the crack of the sofa last night in a panic. The screen has no password protection. I open his work email directly. At 2 a.m. last night, he sent an urgent email to an overseas shell company. He requested that all offshore fund transfer procedures be initiated at 2 o'clock this afternoon. I pick up my phone and dial the number of David's company IT director. Last month, David slashed costs by withholding all project bonuses from the IT department. I transferred $20,000 from my personal bank account to that director's card. "You can make your move now," I say into the phone. "Got it, ma'am." David's backend permissions have been fully downgraded. Every large transfer he makes now requires secondary digital authorization from the new senior consultant. The director replies. I hang up and toss the tablet back onto the sofa. I walk down to the basement, pick up the rusty wrench from the floor, and keep tightening it against the thick, dripping water pipe. 1:30 in the afternoon. Inside the all-glass office at David's company headquarters. Sophia sits behind David's wide rosewood desk. Her muddy work boots are propped directly on the leather desk pad. She chews mint gum, tapping David's solid gold pen against the rosewood surface.
Top, top, top.
David is squeezed into a small single sofa in the corner. His tie is crooked, his collar open. A silver laptop rests on his lap, his 10 fingers flying across the keyboard. The black landline on the desk rings. David immediately drops the computer and stands up. Sophia reaches out her left hand and presses the speakerphone button. David, good afternoon. Regarding the building materials supply contract for the second half of the year. A man's voice comes through the speaker. David can't take calls right now. Sophia shouts into the speakerphone mic, if you have something to say, report directly to me. I'm his senior consultant. The line goes completely silent. 10 seconds later, the man's voice turns cold. And who might you be? Have David pick up. David lunges forward, trying to pull the phone cord. Sophia slams her hand on the desk. David flinches and pulls his hands back. The base price on that contract needs to be cut another 10%. No deal? Then get lost. Sophia finishes and hangs up. David grabs his head with both hands, yanking at his hair. He lifts his right foot and kicks the sofa leg hard. Crazy. That's my biggest building materials supplier. David yells at Sophia, spit flying onto the edge of the desk. Sophia spits her gum into the metal trash can. She picks up a thick product catalog and hurls it straight into David's chest. The book hits the carpet with a dull thud. Is the supplier more important or the money you owe me? Get back to work. Sophia points at the corner sofa. 1:55 in the afternoon. David's scheduled fund transfer time is almost here. David is drenched in sweat, dripping from his chin. He completely ignores the supplier issue. He plops back onto the sofa, placing the laptop back on his knees. He opens the encrypted webpage for the overseas bank and enters a long string of account numbers and passwords. He clicks to confirm the transfer. A red warning box pops up in the center of the screen. Account operation permissions restricted. Contact IT administrator to unlock. David's eyes go wide, bloodshot. He grabs his phone and dials the IT director's number. What the hell is going on with my computer? Unlock it now. David roars at the screen. Mr. David, according to the latest security protocol, your overseas transfers require digital signature authorization from senior consultant Ms. Sophia, the IT director says, his voice flat and steady. David jerks his head up, staring hard at Sophia across from him. Sophia leans back in the executive chair, pulling a black security use shield from her jacket pocket.
She tosses it onto the desk.
The metal casing slides across the surface, stopping in front of David. Need the authorization password? Sophia sneers. David slams the laptop onto the carpet. He rushes to the desk, gripping the edge of the wood with both hands. Give me the password. I'll transfer the money out and pay you back right now. David gasps, mouth wide open. Sophia picks up the torn IOU and uses its edge to scrape dirt from under her fingernails. Transfer the money to that offshore account, and then you'll just flee to South America, right? Sophia threw the crumpled paper ball at David's face. My boss made it clear, this money has to stay in the domestic accounts. You're not going anywhere. 4 in the afternoon. I pushed open the glass door of David's office. The room was a mess. The laptop screen was shattered into a spiderweb pattern, scattered across the carpet. Couch cushions were tossed into the corner. David sat slumped in the middle of the floor, both hands gripping his wrinkled tie tightly. His white shirt was completely soaked through with sweat, clinging to his back. Sophia was still sitting in David's executive chair, head down, playing a game on her phone. I walked up to David and stopped. I looked down at him. David slowly lifted his head. His lips were dry and peeling, completely drained of color. You two planned this together. David raised his right index finger, pointing at me. His finger trembled like it was electrified. I stepped around him, walked to the mahogany desk, and pulled open the big center drawer. I took out all the files, checkbooks, and the company's financial seals, sweeping them into the black canvas bag I was carrying on my back. David crawled over on his hands and knees, reaching out to grab the strap of my canvas bag. Sophia stood up and pressed the hard toe of her work boot against David's wrist. David immediately pulled his hand back. I zipped up the canvas bag and slung it over my left shoulder. I crouched down, looking directly into David's bloodshot eyes. Your big investors are coming Monday to audit the books. I'll hold on to these for now. I reached out and patted his cheek twice. Quitting time, honey. Time to go home for dinner. I stood up, turned, and walked toward the glass office door. Sophia followed behind me. We left David alone in that room full of shattered glass. 5:10 in the afternoon. I drove my old Ford pickup and parked in front of a high-rise office building downtown. I carried the black canvas bag into the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. The elevator doors opened, and I walked straight to the chairman's office at the end of the hall. Richard sat in a wide leather chair. He was David's biggest rival in the building materials industry. The two had been locked in a bitter struggle for 6 years over the city's supply channels. I walked up to Richard's desk, unzipped the canvas bag. I dumped out David's company financial seal, the legal representative authorization letter, and 3 full notebooks of core client supply price contracts, all onto the desk. Thump, thump. The documents piled up into a small mountain. Richard stood up, bracing his hands on the desk. He leaned down, flipping through the price contracts bearing David's signature, page by page. He flipped quickly, the paper rustling. What do you want in exchange? Richard looked up at me. Sell you the whole package. David's company warehouse inventory, transport fleet, and this client list. I pointed at the documents on the desk. At the current lowest market valuation of David's company, the money goes directly into the personal trust account I set up yesterday. Richard nodded. He pressed the intercom on his desk and called in his legal team. For the next 2 hours, I sat in the conference room, using my legal authority as David's wife's representative, signing one acquisition contract after another and stamping them with David's company's red financial seal. I signed 45 names in total. My wrist ached. 7:30 in the evening. My phone screen lit up. Sophia sent a text. David smashed the office window and escaped down the fire escape. I immediately stood up, grabbed my car keys, and ran to the elevator. 8:15 in the evening. I parked the pickup in my driveway. The front door of the house was wide open. The living room floor was covered in muddy footprints. From the basement came the deafening sound of pounding on walls.
Bang, bang, bang.
I walked down the wooden stairs. The steps creaked. The basement air was thick with acrid gypsum dust. David, still in his soaked white shirt, gripped a long-handled sledgehammer. His face was covered in white dust, and he was furiously smashing it into the leaking drywall. The wall had already been torn open into a large hole. The black security safe box was hanging half out of the wall's edge. David dropped the sledgehammer. It clanged loudly against the concrete floor. He grabbed the edges of the safe box with both hands and yanked it out. The lock had already been smashed by him. He reached inside and pulled out 2 yellow manila envelopes. David turned around and saw me standing on the stair step. He grinned. His teeth were coated with white dust. He carried the envelopes over to the metal trash can in the corner. He pulled a silver lighter from his pocket. Click, a flame shot up. You think taking the seal is enough to win? David gasped heavily, his chest heaving violently. As long as I burn the bankruptcy petition and this insurance policy, you won't have any evidence to threaten me. He lit the edge of the envelope. The flames quickly devoured the yellow craft paper. He tossed the burning envelope into a metal trash can. The firelight illuminated his bloodshot face. The envelope burned into a pile of black ash. David dusted off his hands. He kicked over a nearby plastic bucket. Dirty water spilled all over the floor. It doesn't matter if the money can't be transferred. As long as the company is still running, I can keep taking out loans from the bank. I'll report the seal lost tomorrow. David pointed his finger at my nose and shouted, "You and that debt-collecting woman, get the hell out of this house right now." I stood still, watching the still-smoking ashes in the trash can. Heavy footsteps came from the top of the stairs. Richard, wearing a custom black suit, slowly walked down the wooden stairs. Behind him followed 2 burly men in black suits. David's finger, raised midair, froze. He stared intently at Richard's face. His Adam's apple bobbed violently. "Richard, what are you doing at my house?" David stepped back, his back hitting the leaking water pipe. Richard walked over to me and stopped. He pulled a folded document from the inside pocket of his suit jacket and tossed it directly into the puddle of dirty water at David's feet. "David, good evening." Richard kept his hands in his pants pockets, looking at the document on the floor. "An hour ago, your wife, as your legal representative, transferred your company, fleet, inventory, and all client resources to me. The relevant transfer procedures will be submitted to the business department first thing tomorrow morning." David's eyes bulged so wide they looked ready to pop out of their sockets. He looked down at the copy of the contract stamped with a red seal lying in the puddle. "Impossible. This is absolutely impossible." David crouched down, frantically clawing at the document in the dirty water with both hands. The paper softened from the water and tore into several pieces in his hands. "The garbage you burned means nothing." I stepped down the last 2 stairs and stood in front of David. "Now you don't even have a shell company. No bank will give a loan to someone who's lost all their real business operations." David knelt in the muddy water. He looked up at me. He opened his mouth, making gurgling sounds from his throat, unable to form a single complete sentence. "Oh, by the way," Richard kicked a piece of broken plaster aside, "David, I'll also take over the mortgage on those properties under your company's name. You don't need to go to work tomorrow morning. My security team has already taken over that office building." David lunged at Richard, trying to grab his pant legs. The 2 burly men behind Richard immediately stepped forward, one on each side, pinning David's shoulders down hard. David was pressed flat against the cement floor, covered in dust and muddy water. His cheek was pressed tightly against the cold floor. David struggled violently, kicking his legs wildly on the ground. Water splashed against the walls. I turned around and walked up the wooden stairs. Richard and his bodyguards let go and followed me up the stairs. Only the sound of David gasping in the puddle of dirty water remained in the basement. When I reached the living room on the first floor, Sophia was standing at the door with a baseball bat over her shoulder. She looked at Richard's car parked outside. "Did the seal matter get handled?" Sophia asked me. I nodded. I walked into the kitchen, turned on the faucet, and washed the dust off my hands. 7 in the morning. I stood in front of the kitchen sink, washing a frying pan with cold water. Grease flowed down the drain. The phone rang. The caller ID showed City Central Hospital. I answered the phone. A nurse's voice came through. David's mother, Mary, had suddenly suffered a heart attack and was just brought to the emergency room by ambulance. I turned off the faucet, dried my hands with a towel, and grabbed the car keys from the shoe cabinet by the entrance. The hospital hallway had a strong smell of disinfectant. The white fluorescent lights stung my eyes. I followed the signs to the cardiology department. I pushed open the door to room 312. Mary lay on the white hospital bed. A transparent oxygen tube was inserted into her nose. The machine beside her flashed green wavy lines on the screen, making a steady beeping sound. Mary opened her eyes, her wrinkled face turning toward me. Her complexion was pale and bluish. She raised her right arm, with an 4-needle taped to the back of her hand. She grabbed my sleeve tightly with her withered fingers. The iron box. Mary gasped heavily, her chest heaving violently. The iron box under the bed. I leaned in closer, lowering my head to hear her. David came back late last night. He went through my cabinet. He took that iron box. Mary's fingers clenched tightly, her nails digging deep into my fabric. It was filled with all my pension passbooks and the code book. I looked at her cracked lips. I reached out and gently patted the back of her hand twice. I turned and walked out of the ward, closing the white wooden door behind me. I went to the vending machine at the end of the hallway. I dropped in 2 coins and pressed the button for a can of black coffee. The can clattered into the slot. I bent down, picked it up, and pulled the tab. I called Sophia. Sophia knew all the pawnshop owners in the South District. David's been flashing an old lady's passbook all over the South District, trying to cash it out, Sophia said, crunching on something crispy over the phone. He's also been in touch with the forger. He's holed up at the Sunset Motel on Route 8, room 204. I hung up. I finished the bitter coffee and tossed the can into a metal trash bin. I walked back to the nurse's station. I asked the nurse on duty for a copy of Mary's critical condition notice. The bottom of the paper was stamped with the hospital's red circular seal. I drove my old pickup to the Sunset Motel. The walls were peeling in large chunks, revealing gray cement underneath. Black garbage bags were piled up in the corner of the yard. A few stray cats were rummaging through the trash for food. I climbed the rusty external iron stairs to the second floor. The metal plates groaned under my feet. The hallway reeked of moldy carpet, mixed with cheap cigarette smoke. I stopped in front of room 204. A thin strip of light seeped out from under the door. I pressed my ear to the door and heard the sound of rummaging inside, along with the sharp tearing of tape. I slowly crouched down. I folded the critical condition notice with the red stamp in half twice. I slid the paper bit by bit under the gap at the bottom of the door. The noise inside stopped immediately. I stood up, lightened my steps, and retraced my path down the iron stairs. I got into the pickup, closed the door, and parked under the shade of a tree across the street, rolling down the window. 10 minutes later, the door to room 204 let out a screech as it was yanked open. David poked his head out. He wore a black baseball cap pulled down low. He clutched the critical condition notice tightly in his hand, the edges crumpled and wrinkled. He swiveled his head left and right, then dashed down the stairs. He ran so fast he stumbled, nearly falling. He dove into an old sedan parked in the corner. The exhaust pipe belched black smoke, and the tires squealed on the sandy ground before the car hit the road. I restarted the pickup and drove back to the hospital. I pushed open the door to room 312. 2 more people were in the room. 2 police officers in dark blue uniforms stood on either side of the bed, holding tactical clipboards for notes. Mary was leaning against propped-up pillows, speaking softly to one of the officers. 5 minutes later, the sound of rapid footsteps echoed from the end of the hallway. The steps grew closer.
Bang!
The ward door was shoved open hard, hitting the rubber bumper on the wall. David burst into the room. He was drenched in sweat, which dripped down his cheeks onto his yellowed collar. When he saw the police officers in the room, his legs froze. He grabbed the door frame with one hand, his chest heaving like a bellows. "Mom." David swallowed hard and forced himself to walk toward the bed. "I saw the notice. I came right away to see you." Mary opened her eyes and looked at him. Her face was expressionless. She slowly raised her right hand and pointed her index finger at David's bulging right jacket pocket. "My iron box," Mary said, her voice raspy like sandpaper on wood. "You took my passbook. You took the money for my burial plot." David jerked back a step, his back hitting the wooden door. He quickly covered his pocket with both hands. "Mom, you've got it all wrong. I'm keeping it safe for you." The muscles in David's face twitched as he forced an ugly smile. "It's too chaotic out there. It's safer with me." The officer on the left turned and strode over to David. The tall cop pulled a clear plastic evidence bag from his belt. "Mr. David, we received a call from the South District Savings bank counter. Someone tried to forcibly withdraw this pension using a forged signature." The officer stared into David's shifty eyes. "Please take out what's in your pocket." David spun around, reaching for the door handle to bolt. The other officer charged over, grabbed David by the shoulders with both hands, spun him around, and slammed him hard against the wall. David's left cheek was pressed tightly against the white wall, his mouth twisted out of shape from the pressure. The tall police officer put on white gloves and reached into his jacket pocket. The officer pulled out a green bankbook, a black code book, and a rusty copper key. Mary stared at the green bankbook. She closed her eyes, tears streaming from the corners, dripping down her wrinkles onto the white pillow. She picked up a black ballpoint pen from the small table. The officer held out the tactical clipboard to her. At the bottom of the burglary report form, she pressed down hard and signed her full name. The officer put away the clipboard. He unclipped the metal handcuffs from his tactical belt.
Click, click.
2 cold metal rings locked tightly around David's wrists. With his arms twisted behind his back, David was shoved forcefully toward the door by 2 officers. As he passed by me, he suddenly stopped. He twisted his head, his eyes bloodshot, staring intently at my face. "The note you slipped me. You tricked me into coming here to get me arrested." David shouted, spittle spraying onto the floor. I took half a step back, dodging his spit. I watched as the officers pressed down on the back of his neck and pushed him out of the hospital room. The chain of the handcuffs clinked sharply in the empty hallway. The sound grew fainter and fainter. I walked over to the hospital bed, picked up a dry towel, and carefully wiped up the warm water that had spilled on the nightstand. 6 a.m. I stood in the kitchen of this suburban house. David's old silver coffee machine had already been thrown into the metal trash can outside. Sophia walked out of the guest room. A huge black canvas bag was slung over her shoulder. I took out 10 thick stacks of $100 bills and neatly stacked them on the marble countertop. This was the cash I had withdrawn from the bank vault yesterday afternoon. Sophia reached out her right hand and flicked the edge of the bills with her thumb. She unzipped the canvas bag and stuffed all $200,000 inside. "Your debt is settled." I opened the refrigerator, took out a bottle of ice-cold mineral water, and handed it to her. Sophia unscrewed the plastic cap with one hand, tilted her head back, and drank more than half. She slapped the bottle down on the table, then pulled the crumpled original IOU from the inside pocket of her leather jacket. "That idiot David is probably still queuing up to shower on the concrete floor of the detention center right now." Sophia picked up the windproof lighter from the counter. With a click, a blue flame shot up. The fire immediately devoured the edge of the IOU. Sophia held the unburned corner, watching the paper turn completely into black ash. She let go. The ash fell into the stainless steel sink. I turned on the faucet, and a strong stream of water washed all the residue deep into the drain. Sophia pocketed the lighter, strode out the front door, and climbed into her old pickup truck. The engine rumbled as she drove off down the driveway. I turned and walked up the wooden stairs to the second floor. I pushed open the master bedroom door. I pulled all of David's suits, shirts, ties, and even the wooden hangers out of the closet and threw them heavily onto the floor. I dialed the community junk removal company on my phone. Half an hour later, 2 burly men in blue jumpsuits pulled up in a yellow truck and parked in the yard. They carried oversized black industrial garbage bags up the stairs. David's clothes, shoes, golf clubs, even the electric razor from the bathroom, everything was stuffed into the black plastic bags. The workers hoisted the bags and tossed them carelessly into the truck's cargo bed, producing a clattering, chaotic noise. I placed the metal key to this big house flat in the center of the dining table. The house had already gone through a legal foreclosure process at a rock-bottom price and was now fully transferred into my personal trust fund. I pulled up the handle of my silver suitcase, turned, walked out the front door, and got into the yellow taxi waiting by the curb. 2 in the afternoon. The sunlight beat down unobstructed on the white sand. I pushed open the solid wood door of the Hawaii vacation house. The Milan design team that David had paid $500,000 for had completely demolished and rebuilt the entire interior. Underfoot was a whole expanse of gray and white natural marble tiles, the expensive stone David had spent several nights looking at on his tablet. In the center of the living room sat a set of white Italian leather sofas. The walls were painted a clean, pure white. I kicked off my high heels on the doormat and walked in barefoot. The marble tiles felt very cold underfoot. I walked to the far side of the living room. There was a full wall of floor-to-ceiling glass windows. I reached out, grabbed the thick stainless steel door handle, and pushed the heavy glass, sliding door open to the right. The sea breeze instantly rushed into the spacious living room. The air was mixed with the salty smell of the ocean and the fragrance of tropical palm trees. Waves crashed against the black volcanic rock reef outside, producing a loud, rumbling roar. I walked out onto the wooden deck. The planks gave off the dry, sun-baked scent of wood. I picked up a stemmed glass from the bar, dropped 3 square ice cubes into it, and filled it to the brim with blue cocktail. A tiny pink paper umbrella was wedged on the rim of the glass. Glass in hand, I lay back on the white beach lounger right in the middle of the deck. The screen of my phone on the wooden table lit up. The device vibrated incessantly against the surface, emitting a low, muffled hum. The caller ID showed a long string of unfamiliar numbers, prefixed with the dedicated area code for the local detention center. I reached out my right index finger and pressed the green answer icon on the screen. A mechanical female voice droned without emotion. "You have a collect call from the local detention center. Press 1 to accept." I pressed the number 1. Anna, don't hang up." David's voice immediately burst out of the speaker at the bottom of the phone. His throat was incredibly hoarse, every word accompanied by a rough, scraping sound. The background was filled with extreme noise, the clang of iron doors, the loud shouts of guards, and the heavy tread of rubber-soled shoes on the floor. I laid the phone flat on my thigh, picked up the glass, and took a small sip of the chilled cocktail. "Anna, the default judgment came in at noon today," David said, panting heavily on the other end, his voice thick with a nasal tone. The public defender slipped it through the gap in the iron bars. The judge stamped it with a red seal. "I'm completely cleaned out. The house, the pickup in the garage, all gone." I took the lemon slice off the rim of the glass and tossed it into the metal trash can beside me. "I don't even have money for soap, Anna," David began to sob. The sound of him sniffing hard was grating. "They only give us a tiny, tasteless bar of hard soap every day. I can't squeeze another bit out of my toothpaste. Please just send me $20. Just $20 into the detention center account. Okay?" I looked up at the huge palm tree above me. Its broad green leaves swayed wildly in the strong sea breeze. "David, do you hear that sound?" I asked into the phone's microphone. "What sound? Where are you?" David's crying stopped instantly. "The sound of the waves," I said, sitting up straight on the lounger, my feet on the wooden floor. "The waves of the Pacific Ocean. I'm sitting on the deck of this house in Hawaii right now. The design team you paid a fortune for really did an amazing job. Every marble tile here feels perfect underfoot." A sudden dead silence fell on the other end of the line. No one spoke, and even David's breathing seemed to stop. I stood up, glass in hand, and walked barefoot to the huge glass sliding door. "Oh, and David," I said, reaching out my left hand to touch the thick glass surface. "That expensive soundproof glass you insisted on installing in the basement? I put it in too. The quality is truly top-notch." I took a step back and pulled the sliding door shut with force. A crisp click. The metal lock engaged firmly. The roar of the waves was instantly cut off completely. The vast living room fell silent. The ice cubes melted and clinked against the glass, making a faint, delicate sound. As long as the door is closed, you can't even hear a whisper of wind outside, I said slowly into the phone. You liar. You've locked me in this dark iron cage. You're spending the money I earned. David suddenly erupted into a deafening roar on the other end. He pounded his fists against the bulletproof glass of the phone booth, producing a series of dull thuds. I'm getting out.
I'm appealing.
I'll kill you. I took the phone away from my ear and laid it flat on the wooden bar. David's heart-wrenching screams leaked out of the speaker. I pressed my thumb firmly on the red end call button on the screen. All noise vanished in an instant. I opened my phone's contacts, found the card with David's name, swiped my finger to the left, tapped the red trash can icon, and when the confirmation box popped up, I clicked Add to Blacklist and Delete Permanently. The phone screen went dark. I lay back down on the white beach lounger. I closed my eyes, feeling the bright sunlight on my face. I bit down on the plastic straw at the rim of the glass and took a long, hard sip. The cold liquid slid down my throat into my stomach.